time for my April wrap-up where we chat about all the books I read in the month of April. April was my largest reading month of the year so far. I completed 19 books in the month of April. As for quality, it was fine. My average rating was a 3.24, which is better than March, but not quite as good as my best month that I had in February. So it was an okay month. There were a lot of okay things, but I got through a ton of books that were on my TBR. I got through a lot of older books this month, and overall it was just like an eclectic kind of reading month. As always, we're going in order from my least favorite to my most favorite, starting with the books I DNFed. And I'm not going to spend too long talking about the two books that I DNFed this month because I barely read them and there's not much to say. One of those is The Wishing Game by Meg Schaefer. This is one of the books that I got from Book of the Month just to use up some credits. It's been sitting around for a while and I was ready to get through it this month, but this book gave me the biggest ick so fast. I didn't like the writing style. I didn't like the vibes. You're following this teacher who has this child in her class who is an orphan, and he's currently got this foster family, and she just is really attached to this boy, and the vibes were just not for me. I think I saw someone describe this book as saccharine, and it was too saccharine for me. The other one, unfortunately, was The Ministry of Time, which I had an arc for, and I was so excited for this. I thought it sounded so interesting and unique, but the writing style of this, I did not like it. I don't know if it's an arc thing and maybe the finished copy is going to be better. It just was not even really reading like a book to me. I don't really know how to explain it, but I was not connecting with this one. I did just see that Book of the Month made this one of their selections for the month, so I feel like I'm about to see a lot more reviews of it, and maybe someone's opinion will sway me to pick it back up again, but for now, I have decided not to read that for a bit. In general, I'm hoping to make it through this wrap-up quicker today, so I'm going to try to not talk about books for too long, especially books that I have reading vlogs for, like The Secret History, which is my least favorite book I completed this month, and I did an entire dedicated reading vlog to this so you can see my full thoughts, my full experience, and every disappointment I had while reading this book. I've always looked at this as kind of a classic dark academia book that a lot of people have read. It felt like one of those books I needed to check off my list, and I'm glad I did for the sake of just finally knowing what I was missing, I guess. But if you haven't read it, I would definitely say you're good. Don't worry about it. I did include spoilers in that reading vlog as well if you want to watch it and get full spoilers for the book. You can also skip those if you want to watch it in a non-spoilery way, but all in all, I found this to be extremely wordy, extremely slow-paced, and extremely boring for me. One of the arcs I got to this month was Mistakes We Never Made by Hannah Brown, and I was planning to do a dedicated video to reading this book because I've just watched Hannah Brown kind of around in pop culture for the past couple of years. She started on The Bachelor, she became The Bachelorette, she went on to win Dancing with the Stars, then she did some other kind of competition TV show. She's just kind of been in the zeitgeist for a bit. I find her to be an interesting figure because her whole background is she's this like Alabama beauty queen, but she's extremely competitive and driven and has gone on to succeed and really like make a career for herself out of coming from the Bachelor franchise in a different way that other people have in the past. So anyways, I was interested to see when she said she was writing a romance book. I was like, I'll check it out. I'll see what it's like. And I figured it would be pretty good because, I don't know, that's just like her vibe. She just succeeds at the things that she does. But unfortunately, I did not enjoy this book and I gave it a 2-star. The premise of this story, this was one of like the first books I read this month, so I feel like it's been a minute and it doesn't stick with me super well, but the basic idea is you're following this woman who is out of town for her friend's wedding. She also has this former male friend. They were friends in high school. They were like on the debate team together. They've kind of been in and out of each other's lives over the years. He is there as well. And then on the wedding weekend, the bride disappears. She runs off, and for some reason the two of them decide they're the ones who have to get together to go find her, even though there's some weird tension between them at this time. They've kind of always been each other's almosts, like they'll kiss but then they never date, or like they almost kind of date but then someone kind of ruins it. That's how they've been drifting in and out of each other's lives throughout the years, and at this point they're not on the best of terms. So this little road trip situation and this forced proximity to go find the bride ends up re-sparking their romance. I thought the writing of this was fine for it to be a debut novel from someone who has all this other stuff going on. Like usually when a celebrity writes a book, you're like, Is it ghost written? Is it gonna be good? I don't know. But like the writing of this I thought was actually fine. The plot I found to be really boring. And I did not get invested in this couple, and for a romance to work for me, I have to be rooting for the couple, and I actually just did not want them to be together at all. I felt like they were not a good pair, and I felt like there was some therapy that could be done. The book also ends on a weird open note where you don't get the resolution to some of the important things that kicked off the novel, and I wonder if that is potentially leaving the book open to do a spin-off sequel. If so, I personally won't be picking it up, but if this was on your radar and you still want to check it out, it's not bad in terms of the actual writing. Like, it's not clunky to read. I just personally was not invested in the actual romance. Another romance I read this month that did not work out for me is How to End a Love Story by Yulin Kwong. The author of this is one of the people who was working on the adaptation of Emily Henry's novel, I think Beach Read, that's being made into a movie. One of Emily Henry's books being made into a movie. Yulin Kwong is working on it in some way. Screenwriting, producing, I'm not sure. And this is Yulin Kwong's debut novel, I believe. And so that made it interesting to me because I love Emily Henry. And in general, just sounded like it could be an interesting time. The premise of this one, kind of similar to the last one, is two people who have been in and out of each other's lives. They are kind of posed as enemies in a way because the guy is sort of responsible for the girl's sister's death. So she's like, you killed my sister, I hate you. They are now being brought back together because she is a novelist and her book is being adapted into a TV show, a movie, I don't remember. He's a screenwriter on that project, and so they're being pulled back together for this. And then of course a romance develops between them throughout the book. I actually thought this started super strong. I was really, really loving it. There's particularly a scene where they all go away to this cabin and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I love this. I almost feel like this should have come out at Christmas because it's kind of over the holiday times, but I was really liking it. I thought the setup was good. I thought the character building was good. I was invested in what was going to happen. And then around 40%, it took a turn for me that just made me fall out of the book. This was another one where I was not invested in the romance between the characters. I felt like she went from hate to obsession really fast with him. And also, this is a very steamy book. I did see something calling it like a sexy book or something beforehand, but it looked kind of cutesy. And I know this is a problem in the romance industry now, is all these books look cutesy and then you read them and it's just like really, really spicy, which is fine, but I wasn't fully prepared for that. And a lot of the middle portion is a lot of spice and a lot of steamy scenes. And I was like, can we develop an emotional connection first maybe? Because you hated this guy and now you just can't get enough of him and I don't really get it. I'm not following you on this journey. You have lost me. It was disappointing because I was loving the beginning so much, but maybe another book from this author in the future will be a better fit for me. The next two books are my other 2 stars and they were both within the same video. They are Sometimes I Lie by Alice Feeney and Things We Do in the Dark by Jennifer Hillier. I read both of these books in a video I was doing where I was reading thriller books until I found a 5-star, and in case you missed that video, these were not the 5-star. In the case of Sometimes I Lie, this is an author I have read extensively from in the past. I had read everything from Alice Feeney that has been published so far except for this book, and this is her first and sometimes, depending on who you ask, most popular and most beloved book. So I was excited to check it out. The concept of this one is that a woman is stuck in a coma, but she can still hear everything that's going on around her, and you are following her in the present day in that coma, but also pieces in the past to figure out how she got into this situation. There's people around her like her husband, her sister, there's also journal entries in here, and you're trying to piece together the puzzle. I've had problems with Alice Feeney's writing in some of her books being really full of cliches and just not really working for me, and this one actually did not have that problem for me. I didn't mind the writing. I was intrigued with the story the entire time, but I found it predictable because I definitely saw the big twist coming. Also, the book felt like this huge big lead up to almost nothing at the end. It didn't feel very satisfying, so wasn't really a good one for me. And then Things We Do in the Dark. This is a story about this woman who's married to this older man. He ends up dead in the bathtub. She's holding the weapon and everyone thinks she did it. She's being arrested and she has to prove that she didn't do it. You're also getting another story from 20 years prior where a similar crime took place. This one just didn't really meet my expectations. A lot of the book is backstory of things that happened in the past versus the stuff that was more interesting to me of what was happening in the present day with this main main character Paris, who is being arrested. That felt tense and that felt like it had potential, but you get pulled back so much to learn all of these other things. You even switch into some other POVs that it just slowed the book down for me. I wasn't as invested. I definitely saw some things coming and I ended up being pretty bored for most of the book. This was my first book from Jennifer Hillier. In that video, I was picking different like prompts and ways that I typically find patterns in my 5-star thrillers. One of those being exploring a new author. That can sometimes work for me because I don't have expectations beforehand. I can be surprised and have a good time. So I tried with this new author. This one didn't do it for me, but I definitely will read more from Jennifer Hillier in the future because I know she is a well-loved author, and you know, sometimes the first book just doesn't do it for you, and I might find something that I enjoy much more from her in her other books in her backlist. I have 2 books that are 2.5-star reads for me. These were like perfectly right in the middle, fine. I feel really, really neutral about them. I don't have a ton to say about it other than it just wasn't super successful for me, but I didn't dislike it either. The first one is The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor Laval. This was one of the sort of buddy reads for the 24-hour horror-a-thon that I did this month. This is a bi-monthly read-a-thon where we read a buddy read together in the horror genre and we watch a movie together in the horror genre. A lot of it takes place on Discord. It's always linked down below if you want to check it out. Our main buddy read for the month was Ring Shout, which I'll get to in a little bit, but this was sort of like a secondary buddy read because a lot of people are interested in reading this as well. This is a historical fantasy horror sci-fi type of book. I guess cosmic would be the best way to describe it, and it is inspired by a story from Lovecraft. I'm not super familiar with Lovecraft. I also was not super familiar with this author. I think this is the first thing I've completed from him. I did start Lone Women last year, but I ended up DNFing it. I have also seen the TV show adaptation for his book The Changeling, which I was really enjoying, but I didn't love the direction it went and the way it ended. So I kind of anticipated that might be something that happened for me in this book too, because I just find that to happen in cosmic stories for me, as I don't always love the direction that they go. The concept of this one is you're following this guy named Charles Thomas Tester, and he takes on this odd job to deliver this book to this lady, and then after that things kind of unravel for him. He takes on this other job to play music for this guy at his party, and the guy he gets involved with causes his life to take some unexpected turns. At some parts in this I was confused. In general, I thought the pacing was a little bit strange as well. I liked the concept, I like pieces of it, but again, I felt like really neutral about it in the end. Like, it didn't work for me super well. I also didn't hate it. I will try more from this author in the future, but I'm gonna be kind of selective because I just don't know if this is my style, but I knew people really liked this one, so I did want to give it a try, and I'm glad I at least did try it. The other 2.5-star that I had this month is an arc that the publisher sent me of Craft, Stories I Wrote for the Devil by Ananda Lima. This is a short little collection of stories that kind of all go together, and this one gets the 2.5 rating because I just didn't get it. This one just went over my head a little bit. It's a book I was so excited for in concept. The concept of it is that this woman ends up at a Halloween party in 1999. She is a writer, and at that party, she ends up sleeping with the devil. And then after that, she writes all of these stories. Some seem to be about her life and things that are happening. Some seem to be fictional. Sometimes the line is blurred. There's a meta quality to this, as implied by the structure of like the book inside the book inside the book kind of feel of the cover. And I just felt like it was doing all these things that I just didn't fully grasp. But there were some parts of this that I really loved. There is a story in here where the writer is visiting her mother, and her mother says that the ghost of her daughter in the future has been haunting her house. And I love that concept. I love that story. There's also a story in here that is completely written in terms of critique that other writers have written about a short story this author wrote. So you don't actually ever see the short story that the writer wrote, but you kind of learn about it through everyone else's critique. And as someone who has been through many creative writing workshops in my life, that story hit home so much. It was so perfectly executed, such a unique idea, funny, relatable. I thought that one was really cool. And in general, the idea of the devil kind of hovering through your life is very cool. But altogether, I just didn't fully get it. As much as I wanted to, I didn't. So I'll definitely check out more from this author in the future. And if anyone writes a really intricate review that pieces all of it together and makes it make sense for me, I would definitely like to read that. Really quick, a 3-star I had was Spy Family Volume 10. I don't have a lot to say about this because it's the 10th volume in a manga series. I don't read a ton of manga, but I have been keeping up with this series because I I just love it so much. It's about this guy who's a spy. He has to create this kind of like covert family, and he ends up picking a woman who's an assassin and picking a daughter who's a telepath, and none of them know these things. It's a found family vibe. It's silly. There's some darker moments. There's some action moments. It's got a lot of things going on in the series, and in this one in particular, you kind of learn the main guy's backstory, his childhood growing up, and then you get pulled back in the present of what's going on with them. Sort of just felt like a connector book for me in the series. Thought it was okay. Gave it a 3-star. Next up is a book that I gave 3 stars at the time of completing the book, but looking back on it now, I feel like this should probably be more of a 2, but we're already at this point in the video and I'm not stitching it back in there. So it's a 3, but like it's a very, very soft 3. And that is You'd Look Better as a Ghost by Joanna Wallace. This is a book I just randomly picked up. I saw it on the Libby app. The audiobook was available. It was new and the cover really intrigued me. So I decided to give it a try and just see if I fell into the story. And this is another female serial killer book. And I've tried so many female serial killer books over the years. I feel like they're really popular. I don't feel like I ever really love them. I don't know why. I love the concept. I love the idea. I love exploring feminine rage. That's great, but these books for some reason never really resonate with me for some reason. I can think of movies I've enjoyed more. Like I feel like it works better in movie form for me for some reason. But anyways, in this story you're following this woman, her dad dies and that grief starts to kind of send her in this spiral. Some other things happen. She gets mad at this guy, she kills him. What's gonna happen? You know, it's just one of those books. Looking back on it, I just don't feel like a lot happened in the story. It's not super memorable, and the direction that it goes and where everything wraps up, it's kind of like, oh, that's the story we were telling in this. I just wasn't really connected to this main character. I wasn't really invested in this story. The reason I gave it a 3-star when I finished it is because it was such an easy listen and it felt fine and okay. And I was like, oh, all right, that was a fine way to pass the time. If I would have read this physically, I probably would have felt more bored with it, having to like actually physically pick it up, you know, sit down and be invested in it. But having it on as an audiobook while I was like cleaning my house, it was okay. It was a fine time. But all in all, not a super memorable or exciting story. Next is a NetGalley arc I had for a new thriller called Hunted. It took me a minute to get into this one. It was also featured in the reading vlog that I did where I was reading thrillers until I got a 5-star. This was a 3, it was not a 5-star. I didn't fully finish the book in that vlog because I was trying so hard to get to the 5-star that I decided to just move on to the next book, which turned out to work out for me very well. But I said I would tell you about this book in my wrap up, so here we are. There are a lot of POVs in this book and it jumps you right into the action, so it takes a minute to piece together what exactly you're reading. But essentially what you're following is a bunch of different groups of different types of people showing what happens when people become radicalized. There's this organization, terrorist groups that is kind of forming that this lady is putting together, and some people are getting pulled into it who are like fully into this idea. Others kind of got pulled into it and are starting to question the idea. They are creating all these bombs and taking them and going and launching all these attacks while a political race is getting ready to take place. And so like at all these political places, they're trying to go and wreak havoc in all these situations. Some of the people who are in that group, their parents, one of the boys' mom and one of the girls' dad, end up connecting, and they're trying to race against time to go find their children and stop them from doing this. And they're also following an FBI agent who is trying to figure out who's organizing these people, who's involved, and put a stop to all of this as well. So you've got like 3 main different perspectives, all kind of chasing against time to put a stop to these terrorist acts. This is described as a blockbuster thriller, and I definitely agreed with that. It feels very much like watching a movie full of action, and I think I would have enjoyed it a bit better in the movie form than I did in the book form, because it was just a lot to keep up with in the book form. There's not a lot of mystery or psychological suspense in this one. It's very like action thriller based. The stakes are high. Will people get caught in time? Will people survive? You do get emotionally invested in different people in different ways, but it's very much action based, very plot driven. There was a twist reveal in here at one point. Overall, I thought it was okay. It was a quick read. I was invested in where the story was going to go, but it didn't make a huge impact on me. Next is one of my 3.5-star reads, which is She's Not Sorry by Mary Kubica. I have read from this author once before at least. I know I read Local Woman Missing, and I feel like a lot of people love that book, and I just didn't get it. I just didn't love that like a lot of other people did. So I haven't made it a huge priority to get through other books from this author, but I think it was a situation of it just being on the Libby app, being available. I was looking for an audiobook and I decided to give it a go. This is a story about this ICU nurse who gets overly invested in one of her patients, and it ends up potentially wreaking havoc in her life and putting her own daughter in danger. This had a twist that got me. My jaw dropped. I was so surprised. I didn't see it coming. Maybe I should have, I don't know, but it got me. And I love when a thriller can get me with a big plot twist, but I was like, oh my God, how did you do that? How did you trick me like that? I loved it. That alone carried a lot of the book for me. After I finished it and I was looking back on my notes, I was like, wow, I could be really nitpicky with this and talk about all the little pieces of things that were mentioned that never really went anywhere. And in general, like the ending of the book just takes a weird direction, the last 25%. But I just had so much fun with it because I didn't know where it was gonna go. I was intrigued, so I was reading it really fast. I was really put into the story. I got this really big, satisfying surprise. But like I said, the ending didn't land as well for me, so that's why it ended up being the 3.5. But I did round up to a 4-star on Goodreads because that twist, surprising me, deserved to get that extra little bump. I mentioned this one earlier. It was my buddy read for the 24-hour horror-a-thon that has Ring Shout, and this one was also a 3.5. I really enjoyed the concept of this one. You are following this group of people who are hunting down Ku Kluxes. The story is set in 1915 after the movie The Birth of a Nation comes out and inspires a lot of racism. This is in the time of the KKK, and in this book it is a fantastical version of it where these people who they refer to in this book as Ku Kluxes, which are a little bit more distinct than just like a clan member, a Ku Klux in particular in this book, ends up becoming infected. And I don't remember how much the synopsis reveals, so I don't want to give away too much of it, but just know kind of like a fantastical demon sort of situation, and you're following this group of resistance fighters who are trying to hunt down these monsters. I thought the concept was great. I thought the metaphor of it all and how that was constructed was great. Pacing was a little bit weird for me. There were some moments where I was a little bit confused, but in general, good concept. This was my first time reading from this author, and I would definitely read from them again in the future. Next up, for those following along with my monthly Throne of Glass reading that I am doing, this month I read Crown of Midnight, which is the second book in the series. I did start with The Assassin's Blade, so this is the third book for me, but it's the second book in the series. For a quick non-spoilery review of this one, I ended up giving it a 3.5, which is the same rating that I gave Throne of Glass, the first book in the series. The Assassin's Blade, I gave a 4. That one has still been my favorite so far, but the way this one ended and how I feel like we're moving in the story, I think I'm really gonna like the next book, which I have heard that the first 2 books you just kind of have to make your way through and then the story really starts to pick up, so I kind of anticipated that going in. I will say I was getting a little nervous with the first half of this book because I was like, this is kind of boring. It really just felt like a continuation of the first book in a lot of ways. A lot of this book also takes place in one place and starts to feel really claustrophobic, but a switch happens around the midway point and the second half of this book really takes off. That's when I got way more invested in this. I think it started to introduce some interesting concepts about some of these characters and the direction we're going in the next book. It feels like we're going to be more in the adventure space. We're going to be exploring the world a little more, and it made me feel re-energized for continuing in the series, which is good because after this book they start to get longer. I'll also talk about this with spoilers for a second, so if you don't want to hear the spoilers you can skip over this section, but as I was mentioning, the second half really kicked off for me because right around the midway point is when we find out that Princess Nehemia has died, has been brutally murdered, and that really brought Selena, I really need to watch people's videos. Is this Selena or Selena? I'm gonna have to ask someone. But that really brought like the badassery back out of her that we saw in The Assassin's Blade. Throne of Glass, she's so just like hanging out at the castle, pretty dresses, the food, these men are throwing themselves at me. Who am I gonna end up with? Kale or Dorian, a prince or a guard? And like, yeah, there's some battle scenes in that because she's doing the games and whatnot, but it was just a bit of a letdown after reading The Assassin's Blade and seeing her be an assassin. So when this book started and she's still just kind of like hanging around the castle and she started going on these missions for the king, but actually she's not really killing anyone, and she starts getting more of Kale's attention, and then they start sleeping together in this one and she's in love. I was like, oh my god, come on, like we've got to change the pace, something has to happen. So for Princess Nehemia to be murdered and then for that to really unlock her and to really make her start to focus on this whole concept of what Nehemia was trying to tell her, like all you worry about is yourself, why do you not care about the world a little bit more broadly or even just like the people around informed you a little bit more broadly and everything that's going on in this kingdom, and people are trying to fight against the king, but you don't really seem to care about anyone but keeping yourself safe. With Nehemiah's death, that makes her kind of wake up to that. Also, it makes her almost kill Kale, which was really intense. And then boom, Dorian's magic starts coming out of nowhere. And then we find out in this one that Selena is a fae, that she comes from the fae line. And I will say, as soon as Kale started looking into Selena's identity and wondering who she might be, if she might come from a royal family, I was like, oh, okay, she's definitely Aelin, like she is the lost heir, which also made sense because the next book's called Heir of Fire. So like the puzzle pieces were clicking for me. But I didn't realize that meant, like I was not considering that meant that she was from the fae line. So when she goes into that other world and becomes a fae, I was like, oh, plot twist I was not expecting. I also have no idea at this point who we're rooting for, if we're supposed to be rooting for anyone, but they both annoy me as potential love interests for her, Dorian and Kale, because there's so many, like, it's just so back and forth, and like they'll seem good for a bit, but then they do something that just is annoying. And like the end of this book for Kale to be like, we should send her away so she can be safe with the fae, and you couldn't consult with her first before you go pitch that to the king. That would have maybe been a good idea. But anyways, I'm glad that she's leaving, that we're going to see her going somewhere else, that we're going to get out in the world, because I was feeling very claustrophobic in this castle. I'm excited to go see all of these things we're talking about, to go see different villages, to go see her character growth, to get her away from these men for a little bit. That'll be good too. And I'm interested to see what's going to manifest with Dorian and his magic and what all might be going on there. The Quiet Tenant is one of the 4-star reads I had within my video where I was reading thrillers until I found a 5-star. This one didn't quite make it, but I did like it. The concept of this one is there's this man named Aiden, and he abducts and murders women, and he currently has this woman who's been staying in a shed, but now he's going to have to move houses after his wife has died, and so he's moving houses and taking this quiet tenant with him, along with his daughter, who I think is 13 if I'm remembering correctly. She's somewhere around the preteen, teen age, and you're following the women around him, their perspectives versus following his perspective. So you follow the person who was abducted, his daughter, and then this woman in town named Emily who's developing a crush on him. That setup creates a lot of tension, a lot of suspense, and the writing in this is really gorgeous at times. So I really liked the story in general. I do think the middle dragged a little bit. I was getting really frustrated with the main character, which maybe is the point and what you're supposed to do as well, but it did feel like it was dragging a bit in the middle, but then the end had a nice payoff. It ends up picking up pace a lot, and it was very, very tense in the ending. I do wish we could have gotten just like a little more to wrap up some loose ends, but all in all, I think the writing was really good. It did a good job doing what it set out to do, and I would definitely read from this author again. In case you did not know, this is a Paul Tremblay fan channel. I know his books are kind of hit or miss for people, but they are all hits for me. I love Paul Tremblay's stuff. I'm so excited for his new book that's coming out soon, and I've been working through his backlist, and this month I got to Disappearance at Devil's Rock, and I ended up giving this one a 4-star. This one is about this teenage boy who disappears, and his mother and his sister are trying to piece together what happened to him. You're also getting journal entries of his as the reader that you're getting to read, where you're learning about what happened to him potentially, who he was involved with before he went missing, and while he's gone, the mom and the sister believe that they're seeing his ghost. So like most Paul Tremblay books, this has that is it paranormal, is it not kind of conversation going on in it, making you as the reader question it as well, and I just think he does that so fantastically. This felt like the least risky of his books that I've read so far. It felt more like a classic horror/thriller book. It didn't feel like it was taking a ton of risks, but I thought it was really solid. This makes sense since it's one of his older books that it was less risky. He was kind of starting on a more classical foundation, and then his books started taking more experimental angles as they went on. So maybe if you feel like you've liked Paul Tremblay's writing, but the concepts have not really worked for you as well, this might be a good one to go back to. This one also kind of felt similar-ish to A Head Full of Ghosts for me, so if you've enjoyed that one, I would say this one's worth picking up as well, although I did think that one was a little bit better. But I really enjoyed this. I'm always excited to read more from Paul Tremblay, and I just think he does really solid stories. One of my 4.5-star reads was The Future by Naomi Alderman. This one is kind of tricky to explain because it's so ambitious, its concept is so big, its structure is so strange, so I'm just gonna read from the synopsis so that I don't say something that could be a spoiler. You're following a handful of friends who are attempting to save the world from the tech giants whose greed threatens life as we know it. So it's a sort of 5 minutes in the future type of story where there are these tech billionaires who are running these huge companies, and then, you know, everyone else in the world is worried about where that could potentially be leading us. Your two main characters are Martha Einkorn, who is the child of this man who started this cult in Oregon. She is now working as the assistant to one of the tech billionaires. And then a woman named Lai Zhen, who is an internet famous survivalist, who at the beginning of this book is being attacked by an assassin. And then she gets this message from the software telling her how she can escape, and Martha and Jen's worlds collide. That is the best way I can possibly describe this book without spoiling things. I thought this was fantastic. It was so well written. The characters were so well developed. The world was so well developed. The structure was so interesting. The way the story reveals itself to you was so compelling. And then the reveal of where this goes, I absolutely loved it. The only reason this isn't getting that quite 5-star for me is because it did lose me a little bit in the middle. I was a little confused for a period of time, and I think maybe I was supposed to be confused because the payoff of a reveal that happens was so satisfying, having not caught on to what was going on, but it just felt a little bit slow and confusing in the middle for me, which is why it got that little bit taken off. But I do really feel like this could be a 5-star on a reread, and it feels like a book I would reread. So I loved it. I would definitely recommend it. I have not read The Power from this author yet, but I will definitely pick that up at some point now that I know I enjoy her writing so much. Another 4.5 I read this month is The Husbands by Holly Gramazio. This is a book that is about this woman who one day this man comes down from the attic and it's her husband, and she's like, wait, I don't have a husband. So it's this piece of magic type of story where there's just this weirdness going on where now she has this magic attic that dispenses husbands. When a husband goes back into the attic, another one comes down, and she can just keep switching them out until she finds someone that she actually enjoys spending time with. I thought this was such a cute story, such a wonderful concept. It was written so well. I listened to the audiobook of this one and I thought the audiobook was great, so I highly recommend doing that if that is an option for you. Sort of similar to The Future, it didn't quite hit that 5-star mark for me. This book is pretty much what its concept says. It's repetitive. There's not a lot of places for the story to go. So I do feel like it could have been a little shorter and then that would have tightened the story up a little bit, but I had such a fun time with this one while I was listening to it, and I highly recommend it. I had 2 5-stars this month, but I'm only going to tell you about one of them because the other one was from St. Martin's Press. I didn't realize it was from St. Martin's Press when I read it. It's an arc that I've had for months that I got around to this month, and then I realized, I think it might be Minotaur, one of the imprints under St. Martin's Press, and there is currently an ongoing marketing boycott around marketing their books. I'll have some info linked down below if you want to check that out, but I'm going to withhold my review of that in support of the boycott. But I will tell you about the other 5-star I had, which was The Other Side of Night by Adam Hamdy, and this is the book that was featured in my video where I was reading thrillers until I found a 5-star, and this was the 5-star. Sorry to spoil the video for you, but hopefully you've seen it by now. I loved this. This is exactly what I was looking for in a thriller that could really just stand out, surprise me, impress me, tug on my heartstrings a little bit even. I really, really love this one. It's difficult to explain because kind of similar to The Future, it is a little bit interesting in its structure and a little bit mysterious to you in its synopsis. So you don't fully exactly maybe know what you're getting yourself into with this one. And I was honestly confused for a lot of the book, but in a good way. I was confused in the right kind of way where I just wanted to know more and I was intrigued and I was like, how could this be connected? What could I be reading? Where could this book be going? What could the twist be? How can this all be coming together? And then when it did all come together, I was so impressed. I was blown away. I had so much fun with it. It was exactly what I wanted in a thriller experience. All you really need to know is what the blurb kind of lays out for you. So you're following multiple characters in this story: a disgraced police officer, a grieving author, an elusive suspect, all bound together by a series of mysterious deaths, and a boy named Elliot. If you need a little bit more to get you intrigued in the story, it starts with the disgraced police officer, Harriet, coming across a man who gives her a book, and in the book there is a note written that says, "Help, he's trying to kill me." And she has to know what that could mean and starts investigating all of these things. And it is an absolute delight that I highly recommend, especially if you've been bored with thrillers lately like I have been. This one definitely stands out, and I would love to read more from this author again in the future. So that's it for all the books I read in the month of April. Let me know down below if I convinced you to pick any of them up, or let me know if you've already read them and share any thoughts you had about the books as well. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.